George Armstrong Custer was told exactly what was waiting for him at the Little Bighorn. His own Crow and Arikara scouts showed him the largest Native American encampment they had ever witnessed. The village stretched for miles along the river. The pony herd alone numbered in the thousands. They told him there were more Lakota and Cheyenne warriors down there than he had bullets. They begged him to wait for reinforcements. Custer listened, and then he did what he had always done. He charged anyway. The problem, as Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse understood it, was that the tactics of a glory-hungry cavalry officer do not scale to a fight against a unified, prepared, and tactically superior enemy. Custer didn't die because of bad luck. He didn't die because he was outnumbered. He died because he had spent 15 years being told he was invincible, and he had started to believe it. What Sitting Bull knew, what his war leaders Crazy Horse and Chief Gall knew, was that Custer's character had already decided the outcome. They didn't have to defeat him, they just had to wait for him to defeat himself. This is the story of how one man's refusal to believe he could lose killed 268 men in under 2 hours. To understand June 25, 1876, you have to go back to July 3, 1863. On the third day at Gettysburg, J.E.B. Stuart's Confederate cavalry was positioned to sweep into the Union rear just as Pickett's charge hit the center. If Stuart broke through, the entire Union line would collapse. A 23-year-old brigadier general, newly promoted, barely out of West Point where he had graduated dead last in his class, saw what was about to happen. He drew his sword, he turned to the 1st Michigan Cavalry, he shouted, "Come on, you Wolverines!" and he threw himself and his men directly into Stuart's advancing column. The charge stopped Stuart cold. 2 horses were shot out under him. He walked away without a scratch. The press called him the Boy General. Harper's Weekly put him on the cover. He grew his hair long, designed his own uniform, red necktie, velvet jacket, and became the most famous cavalry officer in the Union Army. That was George Armstrong Custer at 23. What followed was a career that confirmed everything he believed about himself. He destroyed Confederate supply lines in the Shenandoah Valley. He captured enemy artillery. He was promoted to Major General at 25. When Lee surrendered at Appomattox, the table on which the surrender was signed was given to Custer as a gift. The war had taught him a lesson. It was the wrong one. It taught him that aggression solves everything, that boldness and brilliance are the same thing, that the enemy will always break if you hit him hard enough, that reconnaissance is for cautious men, that patience is for commanders who aren't special. By 1876, Custer was 36. He had survived the Civil War without a major wound. He had survived a court-martial. He had survived the Washita River campaign, where he attacked a Cheyenne village at dawn and won. Every single data point in his life confirmed the same thesis. George Armstrong Custer was right, and reality would bend to accommodate him. What Custer could not see, what he could not understand, was that the Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Arapaho had gathered in numbers never before assembled on the plains, and they were not planning to run. Custer was not stupid. He was something more dangerous than stupid. He was a man whose intelligence served his ego instead of correcting it. In the 72 hours before the battle, Custer made 3 decisions, each one a logical expression of a man who had stopped believing the rules applied to him. Together, they made the outcome a mathematical certainty. Decision 1. He left the Gatling guns behind. General Alfred Terry offered Custer a battery of Gatling guns before the column departed. Gatling guns, the earliest form of the machine gun, would have fundamentally changed the mathematics of any engagement. Custer refused. He said they would slow him down. What he meant was he didn't think he would need them. He was hunting Indians. In his experience, Indians scattered. Gatling guns were for real battles. Decision 2. He ignored his own scouts. Custer's Crow and Arikara scouts had been tracking the encampment for days.
What they found was unprecedented. Sitting Bull had called the tribes together after a Sundance vision in early June, a vision of soldiers falling upside down into camp, a prophecy of victory. The Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho had gathered in numbers nobody had seen before. Estimates ranged from 1,500 to 2,000 warriors. The scouts told Custer directly. Bloody Knife, Custer's most trusted Arikara scout, looked at the valley and said there were more Lakota down there than Custer had bullets. Custer dismissed it. He told his officers the Indians would scatter at the first sight of cavalry, that the real challenge was catching them before they fled. He had been fighting Native Americans since the Washita campaign. He knew the pattern, or he thought he did. What Custer failed to grasp was that this was not a normal village. This was a gathering built around a spiritual event, a unification that transcended tribal rivalries. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho were not hiding. They were waiting. Decision 3. He divided his command. Custer split roughly 600 men of the 7th Cavalry into 3 battalions. Captain Benteen with 3 companies to scout the ridges to the south. Major Reno with 3 companies to attack the village from the south. Custer himself would take 5 companies, about 210 men, and swing north to hit the village from the flank. This was the Civil War cavalry doctrine that had made him famous. Hit the enemy from multiple directions, create chaos, exploit the confusion. The problem, as Crazy Horse and Chief Gall understood it, was that dividing your force in front of a larger, more unified enemy is not a tactic. It is an invitation to annihilation. Custer didn't know how many warriors he was facing. He had refused to believe the scouts who told him. He had left behind the weapons that could have compensated for the numbers. And now he was splitting his already outnumbered force into 3 fragments, each too small to survive independently. The only way any of this made sense was if you believed the enemy would run. Custer believed that. He was wrong about everything. If you enjoy stories that reveal how wars are won and lost, not on maps, but in the minds of the commanders, hit the like button. It helps this channel more than you know. What Custer could not see was that the tactical clarity on the other side of the Little Bighorn was superior to his own. Sitting Bull was not a battlefield commander. He was the spiritual leader, the man whose Sundance vision had electrified the gathered tribes. But the military leadership underneath him was exceptional. Crazy Horse, the Oglala tactician who had already shown his brilliance at the Battle of the Rosebud just 8 days ago. Chief Gall, the Hunkpapa war leader, whose wife and children had been killed by the 7th Cavalry at the Washita and carried a cold personal hatred for anything in a blue uniform. These men were not panicking. They were not scattering. They were coordinating. Crazy Horse understood terrain in a way Custer did not. He knew every ravine, every ridge, every approach to the village. He knew that if Custer's force could be pinned in the open, the numbers would do the rest. Gall understood something else. Custer had divided his command, and the fragment under Major Reno attacking from the south had to be neutralized first so the full weight of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors could be turned north against Custer. When Reno's charge hit the south end of the village, it briefly looked like what Custer expected, a scattering of warriors, a brief exchange of fire. But what Custer mistook for retreat was actually repositioning. Within minutes, hundreds of warriors poured out of the camp and drove Reno's men back across the river and up onto a bluff. Reno had lost a quarter of his men and all of his nerve. He would remain pinned on that hill for the next 24 hours, unable to support Custer, unable to do anything but survive.
Benteen, meanwhile, received the famous note from Custer. "Come on, big village, be quick, bring packs." But Benteen was miles away. By the time he reached the battlefield, he encountered Reno's shattered command, not Custer's. He made the decision to stay with Reno rather than ride toward the sound of the guns. Benteen's choice was, in its own way, a judgment on Custer. He didn't believe Custer needed him. None of them did. They had all been conditioned to believe Custer would win. because Custer always won. While Reno was routed and Benteen hesitated, Custer's 210 men were walking alone into the jaws of roughly 1,500 to 2,000 warriors who had just annihilated Reno and were now turning their full attention north. What happened in the next 90 minutes was not a last stand, not in the way the legend tells it. In the 1980s, a prairie fire swept across the Little Bighorn battlefield. The fire cleared the grass and exposed the ground for the first time in a century. Archaeologists moved in. They mapped cartridge cases. They traced individual bullets to individual weapons. They reconstructed the battle not from survivor accounts, because Custer's battalion had no survivors, but from the physical evidence. The picture that emerged dismantled the heroic narrative. The cartridge cases showed a collapse, not a defense. Some soldiers fired wildly, their casings scattered in patterns that suggested panic, not disciplined volleys. Some fired only a handful of rounds, then apparently threw their weapons away. Others broke from the formation entirely, sprinted down the slopes, and were cut down in flight. Lakota and Cheyenne accounts, collected years later, described things the official Army reports never acknowledged. Some of Custer's men shot themselves rather than be captured. Some were so paralyzed with terror they made no effort to defend themselves. The fighting was over in less than 2 hours. Custer was found near the top of the hill with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest, one to the left temple. He was 36 years old. Around him lay his 2 brothers, Tom and Boston, his nephew, Henry Reed, his brother-in-law, James Calhoun, and 210 other men of the 7th Cavalry. The final toll, 268 U.S. soldiers and scouts dead, 55 wounded, 6 of whom later died. Lakota and Cheyenne losses, estimated between 31 and 100. Read that ratio again. An army outnumbering its enemy by at least 3 to 1, possibly 5 to 1, inflicted fewer casualties than it sustained. That is not a battle. That is an exposure. The Lakota and Cheyenne didn't just defeat Custer, they revealed him. They revealed that the entire architecture of his military identity, the charges, the confidence, the certainty, was built on the assumption of a weaker, more disorganized adversary. When that assumption collapsed, there was nothing underneath. No plan B, no tactical reserve, no humility. The news of Custer's death reached the eastern cities on July 4, 1876, the centennial of American independence. The nation had been celebrating its 100th birthday, and now its most famous Indian fighter was dead, his command annihilated, his body stripped and mutilated on a dusty hill in Montana. The immediate reaction was to make Custer a martyr. His widow, Libby, spent the next 57 years of her life protecting his reputation, writing memoirs, attacking anyone who suggested her husband had made a mistake. The myth of the last stand, the heroic circle, the final volley, the noble death was manufactured with astonishing speed and cemented into the national memory. But the truth was always visible. Custer didn't die because his subordinates failed him. He didn't die because the Gatling guns were left behind. He didn't even die because he was outnumbered. He died because he had been told for 15 years that he was invincible, and he had started to believe it. The tragedy of Custer is the tragedy of every commander who confuses luck with genius. The tactics of a bold cavalry colonel do not scale to a fight against a unified, prepared enemy who knows the terrain better than you do. Sherman understood this when he looked at John Bell Hood and saw a man whose character made defeat a mathematical certainty. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse understood it when they looked at Custer. Custer was the only one who didn't. And on June 25, 1876, 268 men paid for that blind spot with their lives. If you want more stories like this, the ones that go past the dates and the maps, into the psychology that actually decides who lives and who dies in war, subscribe to this channel. We'll see you in the next one.